The night my father told me college was a waste on a girl, he was sitting in a recliner I bought. He didn't know that. He said it like a rule. Like gravity. Like something already decided. No daughter of mine needs college, he told the room, not even looking at me. You'll marry. That's enough. What he didn't know, what no one in that house knew, was that 3 months earlier, I had signed papers that quietly changed everything. Including who legally owned the roof over his head. I was 17 when he first said it. Not in anger. Not in a fight. Just casually, like he was commenting on the weather. We were at the kitchen table. The same scratched oak table we'd had since I was little. My college acceptance letter sat folded in front of me, edges worn from how many times I'd opened and closed it that week. My mom stood by the stove pretending not to listen. No daughter of mine needs college, my dad said, flipping through the mail. You think I'm paying for you to move away and get ideas? I remember the hum of the refrigerator. The clock ticking above the sink. The smell of burnt coffee. I got a scholarship, I said. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. It covers most of it. He didn't even look up. Most isn't all. It wasn't really about money. We both knew that. My older brother went to college. Out of state. My dad helped him move in. Helped him pick classes. Bragged about him at church like he'd personally built the campus. When it came to me, the rules were different. You'll marry, he said, folding the newspaper. You don't need debt. You need stability. Stability meant staying home. Working part-time. Helping mom. Waiting. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the acceptance letter in my desk drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't feel dramatic about it. I just felt boxed in. The next morning, I called the financial aid office from the public library. I asked questions quietly, like I was confessing something illegal. Work-study options. Deferred housing payments. Emergency grants. I learned something important that week. You don't always need permission. You need information. 4 months, I balanced 2 lives. At home, I nodded. I agreed. I let him believe I'd come to my senses. In private, I filled out forms. I applied for every grant I could find. I worked evenings at a hardware store 2 towns over so nobody from church would see me in uniform. My mom noticed, of course. One night, she stood in my doorway and said softly, "You should be careful." Of what? I asked. She hesitated. Of wanting more. That sentence stayed with me. Wanting more. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't disrespect. It was oxygen. The twist came 6 months later, when my grandfather passed away. He and my dad hadn't spoken much in years. Pride on both sides. Stubborn men. The will surprised everyone. Grandpa left his small rental property, a modest 2-bedroom house across town, to me. Not my brother. Not my father. Me. There were conditions, though. Quiet ones. Legal ones. If I chose to sell it, the proceeds were mine. If I chose to rent it, the income was mine. And if I chose to live there, it was mine, free and clear. My father read the will twice. His jaw tight. It's sentimental, he said dismissively. Doesn't mean anything. But it meant everything. Because 3 months later, when my dad's business hit a rough patch and he quietly fell behind on mortgage payments, he didn't know something I did. And that's when things started to change. My father never talked about money unless he was lecturing someone about it. He ran a small construction supply business. Nothing flashy. Steady contracts. Local builders. Church connections. He liked control more than profit. When Grandpa's rental property passed to me, Dad treated it like a sentimental trinket. Old house. Needs work, he said. Not exactly a blessing. But I went to see it anyway. It was small. Beige siding. Slightly crooked mailbox. The porch creaked when I stepped on it. But it was clean. Structurally solid. Grandpa had maintained it obsessively. I stood in the empty living room and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. I didn't move in. I didn't tell my father my plans either. Instead, I rented it. Quietly. A young nurse and her toddler signed the lease. Nothing complicated. Market rate. Clean paperwork. I learned how to file taxes as a landlord. I learned about maintenance deductions. I learned about escrow. Information became my weapon. Meanwhile, at home, my father's business started to strain. It wasn't dramatic. No big announcement. Just tension. Shorter answers. Phone calls taken outside. One night I overheard him arguing in the garage. "I told you I'd make it right," he said. "Give me 90 days. 90 days. The next week, I saw the first notice tucked inside a stack of unopened mail on the counter. Mortgage delinquency. I didn't say anything. 2 months later, he refinanced. I know because I found the documents left carelessly near the printer. He assumed I didn't read financial paperwork. That had always been his mistake. The refinance bought him time. Not stability. What he didn't realize was that Grandpa had left something else in the will. A letter. Not emotional. Not sentimental. Practical. It explained why he left the property to me. "You're the only one who reads things," he'd written. That matters. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I read that. 3 months after the refinance, the second notice came. This one heavier. Final warning language. Default risk. My mother looked smaller that week. She didn't ask questions. She just started making casseroles more often, like food could hold walls up. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was an envelope. Foreclosure pre-approval. If the debt wasn't corrected, the house would enter auction processing. Auction. I researched quietly. In Texas, foreclosure auctions move fast. Once it hits the courthouse steps, it's public. Humiliating. Permanent. He still didn't tell anyone. Not my brother. Not church. Not even me. One night, I asked him directly. "Are we okay?" I said, keeping my tone neutral. He looked at me like I'd crossed a line. "Don't concern yourself with things you don't understand." That sentence sealed it. I understood more than he did. Here's what he didn't know. The rental income from Grandpa's house had built up. I hadn't touched it. I'd also invested a portion into a conservative mutual fund on advice from the bank manager, who, ironically, had been a former tenant of Grandpa's decades ago. And there was something else. Grandpa had transferred the deed into a living trust before he died. I was the sole trustee. Which meant the asset was protected. Which meant I had leverage. The foreclosure notice came on a Thursday. The auction date was set for the following month. Dad finally told the family that Sunday after church. "We might need to downsize," he said casually over roast chicken. My brother frowned. "Why didn't you say something?" Dad shrugged. "I'll handle it." That night, I drove across town to Grandpa's rental house. The tenant's porch light was on. Warm. Stable. Safe. I sat in my car for a long time. I wasn't thinking about revenge yet. I was thinking about what happens when pride costs everything. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. One to a real estate attorney. One to a bank. And one to the foreclosure trustee. I asked very specific questions. What happens if a third party pays off the lien before auction? What if that third party requests the deed transfer as part of the settlement agreement? What if that third party is the daughter who doesn't need college? The process was clean. Legal. Paper-driven. No confrontation. No screaming. Just signatures. On the day the debt was satisfied, my father received a certified letter confirming the mortgage had been paid in full. He assumed it was a miracle. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, another certified letter arrived. Transfer of title. New property owner. My name. He read it standing at the kitchen counter. I watched his hands shake slightly. Just slightly. Is this some kind of mistake? He muttered. I didn't answer right away. Because the real conversation hadn't started yet. He read the letter 3 times. The kitchen was quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. My mother stood near the sink, drying her hands on a dish towel she wasn't really using. Is this some kind of mistake? He said again, slower this time. I shook my head. No. He looked at me then. Not dismissively. Not casually. Really looked at me. When did this happen? 2 weeks ago, I said. He laughed once. Sharp. Disbelieving. You don't have that kind of money. I didn't correct him. You said you didn't want me involved in things I didn't understand, I replied. So I learned. The silence that followed felt different from the courtroom silence in the future. This one was personal. My brother stepped forward. What exactly are you saying? I reached into my bag and placed a thin folder on the table. Not dramatic. Just clean. Inside were copies. The foreclosure notice. The payoff receipt. The deed transfer confirmation. I satisfied the lien, I said calmly. In exchange for full title transfer. My father's jaw tightened. You bought my house? No, I corrected gently. The bank sold it. That sentence landed harder than anything else. He sat down slowly. For the first time in my life, I saw something unfamiliar in his face. Uncertainty. You did this to embarrass me, he said. No, I said quietly. I did this because you were going to lose it. That part was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was this: I was done waiting for permission to exist. He rubbed his temples. You don't even live here. I could, I said. It's legally mine. My mother looked between us like she was watching a storm approach from both directions. What happens now? She asked softly. I had thought about that for weeks. I'm not kicking anyone out, I said. But things will be formal. He stared at me. You're charging us rent? Yes. My brother exhaled. That's cold. No, I said evenly. Foreclosure is cold. Auction steps are cold. This is paperwork. I slid a lease agreement across the table. Market rate. Slightly below, actually. Structured payments. Late fees clearly outlined. Grace period included. You can refuse, I added. But then I'll have to explore other options. He understood what that meant. Sell. Public listing. Open houses. Church whispers. His pride was louder than any anger. You planned this, he said slowly. I prepared, I replied. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. I could almost hear him recalculating everything he thought he knew about me. The girl who didn't need college. The daughter who should marry. The one who didn't understand money. I was protecting you, he said finally. From what? I asked. From struggle. I let that sit for a moment. Struggle isn't the same as ignorance. He didn't answer. That night, he didn't yell. He didn't slam doors. He didn't threaten anything. He just signed the lease. His signature looked different than usual. Less confident. Over the next few months, something subtle shifted in the house. He started asking questions. About interest rates. About trust structures. About escrow accounts. He didn't apologize. Not in words. But once, when a bill arrived and he handed it to me automatically, he caught himself. Then he said, "Actually, can you explain this?" That was the first time he had ever asked me for help with money. And here's the part that mattered most. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind him of what he'd said about college. I simply explained. Calmly. Precisely. Because revenge isn't always about humiliation. Sometimes it's about correction. And correction lasts longer. 6 months later, I moved out. Not because I had to. Because I could. I enrolled in night classes. Business law. Finance. Property management. I paid tuition in full. When he found out, he didn't argue. He just nodded once. The house still stands. The lease still renews annually. And every first of the month, rent arrives on time. Not because he has to. But because now he understands. Rent changes people. Not the payment itself. The position. The first month he transferred it electronically. No eye contact. No comment. Just a quiet confirmation notification on my phone while I was sitting in class. It felt strange. Not powerful. Not victorious. Just balanced. At home, things adjusted slowly. The air in the house felt different. Less authoritative. More cautious. My father stopped speaking in absolutes. He no longer said, "This is how it is." He started saying, "What do you think?" That shift didn't happen overnight. It happened in small fractures. The church community eventually found out. Not because I told anyone. Because paperwork always leaves trails. A county record update. A tax assessor note. Someone looked it up. It wasn't gossip at first. It was confusion. "Didn't you say you almost lost the house?" one man asked my father after service. He cleared his throat. It was handled. Handled. The difference now was that people knew he hadn't handled it alone. The truth didn't humiliate him. It humbled him. There's a difference. My brother took longer to adjust. He called me one evening, voice tight. "You could have warned us," he said. "I did," I replied. "Just not with words." He was quiet for a moment. "You changed the power dynamic." "No," I said calmly. "The bank did. I just stepped in." That distinction mattered to me. Because I hadn't manipulated anything. I didn't forge documents. I didn't exploit loopholes. I simply understood the system better than he assumed I could. And that assumption cost him. A few months later, something unexpected happened. My father asked to see the rental property across town, Grandpa's house. He'd never visited it since the will. We drove there on a Sunday afternoon. The tenant had moved out by then. I was preparing to renovate and increase the value. He walked slowly through the rooms, hands in his pockets. "It's solid," he muttered. "Yes." "You're managing this yourself?" "Yes." He nodded once. There was something heavy sitting between us. Not resentment. Not anger. Recognition. He stopped in the kitchen and looked at the cabinets. "I was wrong about one thing," he said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. "About what?" I asked. He exhaled. "You don't need protection." It wasn't an apology. But it was the closest he'd ever come. I didn't press him further. The real justice wasn't financial. It wasn't ownership. It was that moment. Because for the first time in my life, he wasn't speaking down to me. He was speaking level. The following year, I expanded. Sold the rental at a profit after renovations. Rolled the equity into 2 smaller properties. 1 commercial unit. 1 duplex. I treated it like a business. Because it was. Meanwhile, my father's business stabilized. Slowly. Carefully. Under stricter budgeting. Under clearer contracts. He started reading documents twice. That detail didn't escape me. The last significant shift happened at Thanksgiving. Extended family. Long table. Usual noise. An uncle asked casually, "So what are you studying again?" Before I could answer, my father spoke. "Business law," he said. His tone wasn't defensive. It was proud. I didn't look at him right away. I focused on cutting my turkey evenly. Keeping my expression neutral. But inside, something unclenched. For years, I had felt like a footnote in my own family. A supporting character. A future dependent. Now I was a stakeholder. Not because I demanded it. Because I demonstrated it. Justice doesn't always arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as redefinition. He still lives in that house. He still pays rent. But the conversation has changed. He asks about market trends. About property values. About refinancing options. And when church members make comments about daughters not needing too much education, he doesn't laugh anymore. He clears his throat. And says nothing. Silence can be correction. The irony is, I never wanted to own his house to control him. I wanted to prove I could control myself. The house was leverage. But independence was the goal. There's one more piece to this story. One final shift. Because ownership changes more than paperwork. It changes legacy. A year after I bought the house, I stopped thinking of it as his house. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was structure. Routine settled in. First of the month. Electronic transfer. A short confirmation message. No tension. No resentment. Just terms. The biggest change didn't happen inside the house. It happened outside of it. At church. For decades, my father had been the loudest voice in the room when it came to traditional values. Daughters stay close. Sons go build. That was the rhythm. But one Sunday, a young girl, maybe 16, mentioned she'd been accepted to a university out of state. Her father laughed it off. "Why," he said. "You'll just come back married." The room did that polite chuckle. The same one I remembered. And then something subtle happened. My father didn't laugh. He shifted in his seat. "She should go," he said calmly. The room went quiet. "It's good to understand contracts before you sign them," he added. No one missed the weight of that sentence. Not even me. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the hymnal in my lap. But I heard it. That was the real transfer of ownership. Not the deed. Perspective. A few months later, he asked me to help restructure part of his business. Not because he had to. Because he wanted to. We sat at the same kitchen table where he once dismissed my acceptance letter. I spread out financial statements. Debt schedules. Supplier contracts. He listened. Really listened. "Walk me through it," he said. No sarcasm. No edge. Just respect. That moment felt bigger than the foreclosure ever did. Because money is replaceable. Mindsets are not. The final turning point came unexpectedly. My brother announced he and his wife were expecting their first child. A girl. The announcement dinner was awkward at first. Everyone calculating what the future might look like. My father held the ultrasound photo in his hands longer than anyone else. "She'll do whatever she wants," he said quietly. No one argued. Not anymore. The following spring, I made a decision. I transferred the house. Not back to him. Into a shared trust. My name remained primary trustee. But the long-term beneficiary was my niece. Educational trust clause included. College fund protected. No conditional language about marriage. No if statements tied to gender. When I told my father, he didn't protest. He just nodded slowly. That's smart, he said. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was evolution. I never confronted him about what he said that night years ago, about daughters not needing college. I didn't need to. Because the world had corrected him. Through paperwork. Through quiet strategy. Through patience. And here's the truth most people won't admit. I didn't win because I was smarter. I won because I refused to stay uninformed. Information changes power dynamics. Education changes narratives. Ownership changes tone. But restraint? Restraint changes legacy. I still remember the acceptance letter. I kept it. It's framed now in my office. Yes, office. Small. Sunlit. Overlooking the parking lot of the commercial unit I own. Sometimes I look at that letter and think about the girl who sat at the kitchen table being told she didn't need more. She didn't argue loudly. She didn't rebel publicly. She prepared. That's what people misunderstand about revenge. It's rarely explosive. It's architectural. You build it quietly. Brick by brick. Clause by clause. Until one day the structure stands on its own. And the people who underestimated you are living inside it. The house still belongs to the trust. The lease still renews annually. My father still pays rent. But now, when people ask him about his daughter, he doesn't say she didn't need college. He says she understands how things work. And that is enough. Because the girl who once needed permission now owns the paperwork. And the man who once owned the house now understands the fine print. Quiet endings are the strongest ones. No shouting. No humiliation. Just correction. And a future that no one else controls.